Am I the only one who doesn't panic at the reference that go back to where you're coming from? Am I the only one living out of Africa? Am I the only African living out of Africa who have zero fear of going back to where they're coming from? Sometimes I feel strange because when I see people panicking, I have no fear of going to where I'm coming from. I'm sorry.
90-year-old racist woman tells Big Shaq, go back to Africa. His response leaves the crowd speechless. One sunny afternoon, Big Shaq, known for his towering presence and fame as a basketball legend, decided to visit his usual corner store. Despite his celebrity status and impressive physique, standing over 2 meters tall, he enjoyed the simple pleasure of grocery shopping. It was his way of unwinding after long, demanding days. Casually dressed in a gray t-shirt, jeans, and a shiny watch, Shaq strolled into the bustling store with his usual friendly demeanor. The staff familiar with his visit greeted him warmly, and he returned their smiles as he picked up a basket and began walking through the aisles. Stopping at the cereal section, Shaq browsed the shelves with focused attention, carefully reading labels to find something nutritious. He was so absorbed in his task that he didn't notice an elderly woman, Mrs. Margaret, approaching behind him. She was a petite lady with snow-white hair, leaning on a cane and pushing a squeaky cart. "Excuse me, young man," her voice rang out sharply. "How am I supposed to get my cereal when you are standing in the way?" Startled, Shaq turned around to face her. Seeing her stern expression, he quickly stepped aside with a polite smile. "Sorry about that, ma'am," he said warmly. But Mrs. Margaret wasn't finished. Glancing up at him with a disapproving look, she muttered, "They will let anyone in here these days. No standards anymore." Her words carried a tone of prejudice that Shaq couldn't ignore. Though her remark stung, he chose to remain calm, a principle he'd held on to throughout his life. With a deep breath, he resumed browsing, determined not to let her word ruin his day. As Shaq moved to leave the aisle, Mrs. Margaret suddenly shouted, her voice loud and accusatory, "Security! Someone get a security right here." The store fell silent and customers turned to see what was happening. A young security guard hurried over, looking bewildered. Mrs. Margaret pointed at Shaq with a trembling finger. "Get him out of here. People like him don't belong here. Send him back to Africa." Time seemed to stand still. Shaq stood motionless, processing the hateful word. Though his expression remained composed, the hurt was evident in his eyes. He had faced prejudice before, but the blatant venom in her word was a painful reminder of the challenges he still endured. The security guard hesitated, glancing between Mrs. Margaret and Shaq. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "he hasn't done anything wrong. He's just shopping." Mrs. Margaret's face flushed with anger. "Are you refusing to listen to me?" she demanded, banging her cane on the floor. "Get the manager." Moment later, the store manager arrived, looking serious. Mrs. Margaret wasted no time, pointing again at Shaq. "I want him out of this store now." Before the manager could respond, Shaq stepped forward. His deep, steady voice filled the aisle. "Ma'am," he began, his tone calm but firm, "I understand that you may not be used to seeing someone like me here, but I'm just here to shop like you and every other one else. I'm a son, a friend, a hard-working man, and a citizen of this community. My skin color doesn't change that." The store remained silent as Shaq continued, his words powerful yet full of grace. "I've faced comments like yours before. They're hurtful, but I choose not to respond with anger. Instead, I feel sad that someone who has lived as long as you have could hold on to such outdated views." Mrs. Margaret faltered, her eyes dropping to the floor. Shaq's voice softened. "I have a grandmother about your age. She taught me to respect my elders because they have seen and experienced things I never will. But if she were here and heard the words you said to me, I think she would feel disappointed." The room was heavy with emotion. A few shoppers wiped their eyes, moved by Shaq's composure and sincerity. "You've seen the world change," Shaq said gently. "If your grandchildren heard what happened here today, Would they be proud? Is this the legacy you want to leave behind? Mrs. Margaret's hands trembled as tears welled in her eyes. Her voice quivered as she finally spoke. I didn't think of it that way. You are right. I'm sorry. Shaq gave her a kind smile. It's okay, ma'am. We'll all make mistakes. What's important is learning from them. The aisle erupted in applause. Mrs. Margaret reached out, placing a hand on Shaq's arm. Her voice was now soft and genuine. Thank you for teaching me this, she said. Shaq nodded. We can all learn from one another. That's how we grow. The tension in the store dissolved. The manager thanked Shaq for his grace, and customers approached to express their admiration. Even Mrs. Margaret, now visibly humbled, left with a warm smile as Shaq exited the store that evening. The golden sunset bathed the street in a peaceful glow. He felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing he had transformed a moment of hostility into one of understanding and humanity. The story spread throughout the community, becoming a powerful reminder of compassion and forgiveness. Mrs. Margaret, once known for her biases, began greeting everyone with kindness, while Shaq continued to inspire others with his big heart and unshakable belief in the power of kindness. Thank you very much. This is so inspiring. I believe we have learned something. It's never good to pay hurt with hurt, to pay disrespect with disrespect. It's always good to pay hurt with kindness and disrespect with kindness. Thank you very much, Mr. Shaq, for this wonderful lesson. We have all learned from it.
We have been groomed that when we are out of the country or in the Western world, we should have a kind of fear or feel anger when somebody tells us go back to where you're coming from. Like it's an insult for somebody to tell you to go back where you're coming from. Why should it be an insult? Why should there be this fear in your mind? Why? That's my question. So if somebody tell me go back to where you're coming from, it's not, for me, it's not an insult. My dream is that African people should get their pride back, not making them to feel that where we are coming from is hell and wherever we are is heaven. That's what we have been selling to them the whole time, and that's why we have no respect. We tell our children only bad things about where we are coming from. We get them confused and they get identity crisis. We are breeding a generation of low esteem human beings who lack an identity. That is the first pride of a human being. Your identity, your pride that you are you, your name, where you're coming from. And that is what we are refusing the children we are giving birth to here. It is a crime. You will not be afraid for somebody to tell you go back to your country. We should stop this fear. Africa is not hell.